every day. Thousands of people just quit trying to learn a brand new physical skill. Like they walk away from a golf course or maybe a yoga studio or a beach and they're just feeling utterly defeated. And it's not because they aren't athletic enough or, because they lack willpower.
Right.
They quit because the instruction manual, like the textbook they are being forced to follow, is just physically impossible for their specific body to execute.
It's actually a quiet tragedy in adult education. You watch an instructor perform a movement, and they make it look like magic.
Right.
They are fluid, effortless, and they give you the exact steps. And you understand the theory perfectly in your mind.
Yeah, intellectually, you get it.
Exactly, you get it. But when you tell your body to translate that theory into kinetic reality, there's a profound disconnect. And usually, when we fail to execute that perfect form, our immediate reaction is to internalize the failure. Like, we tell ourselves we aren't strong enough, or we aren't flexible enough, or we just aren't cut out for it.
Yeah, we feel like we are the problem. But what if the problem is the curriculum itself? And that is really the mission for our deep dive today. We're going to unpack why the one-size-fits-all approach to learning complex skills is fundamentally broken, and how adjusting the starting line to fit our actual physical realities can be the key to unlocking success. And to do this, we are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources centered around one of the most notoriously difficult sports to learn, which is beginner surfing.
Oh, yeah.
So we have an incredibly detailed instructional infographic breaking down 5 distinct ways to stand up on a surfboard.
Yeah.
We've got a manifesto-style educational text on the concept of the adaptive takeoff. And we have the real-world application of this theory via the YouTube channel of a creator who goes by SurferCast.
Surfing is really the perfect lens for this discussion because of its uniquely steep learning curve. I mean, it is a highly dynamic environment. The wave is moving, the board is moving, and you have to move your body from lying down to standing up in a fraction of a second.
Yeah, it's a lot all at once.
It is. So by examining the mechanics of how we teach that specific split-second movement, we uncover some profound insights into how we approach physical barriers, education, and just personal success in almost every area of life.
So let's start with the ultimate gatekeeper of surfing, which is the takeoff or the pop-up. So this is the critical move where you transition from paddling on your stomach to standing on your feet. And according to our infographic, there is a standard basic pop-up method. This is the textbook ideal.
The gold standard.
Right. You place your hands by your chest, you push up, you jump both feet forward between your hands simultaneously, and you pivot your feet to establish a stable stance. And boom, you are surfing.
That is what every traditional surf instructor wants to see on day one. It is the gold standard of form.
But reading the mechanics of that, I instantly thought of it like trying to tune a heavy-duty pickup truck using the exact same repair manual designed for a lightweight sports car. Like the mechanic tells you to apply a specific amount of force to the suspension to get it to corner perfectly.
Yeah.
For the sports car, it works brilliantly because the weight distribution matches the instructions. But when you apply that exact same force to the heavy-duty truck, nothing happens. The mass, the center of gravity, the clearance, it's all completely different. And you are not dealing with a defective truck, you are just applying physics that do not match the machine.
That mechanical mismatch is the core thesis of the educational text we are looking at. The argument here is that forcing this singular textbook posture on every single learner actually raises the barrier to entry artificially. Like, think about the biomechanics required for that basic pop-up. You need explosive upper body strength to clear your torso from the board, incredible hip mobility to swing your legs under your chest, and rapid core contraction to pull it all together in one fluid motion.
You are basically being asked to do a plyometric burpee on a wet piece of fiberglass that is hurtling toward the beach.
Yes.
And by plyometric, I mean a movement that requires your muscles to exert maximum force in tiny intervals. You have to recruit all these fast-twitch muscle fibers to launch your entire body weight into the air from a dead stop.
Now, imagine a student who has a larger build, or perhaps they have very thick thighs, or they simply lack that baseline hip flexibility. When a larger thigh hits a tight hip socket during that explosive jump, the femur literally runs out of space.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the pelvis has to tuck, the momentum dies, and the feet just drag. The text points out that if a teacher strictly demands the textbook pop-up, that student has to expend a massive amount of energy just trying to force their joints into an angle they physically cannot achieve.
So the structural integrity of the movement just collapses under that demand.
Exactly. And the impact of that collapse goes far beyond just a missed wave. The text argues that this rigid instruction makes the movement physically impossible for some, leading to incredibly low success rates. When you are out in the ocean, battling currents, failing over and over, exhausting your muscles, instead of being a fun, joyful sport, surfing becomes a painful, frustrating chore. It actively destroys the learner's confidence. They walk away thinking, I'm not a surfer, when the reality is they just weren't given a path to standing up that respected their unique anatomical realities.
Which brings up the obvious question of what happens next.
Uh-huh.
Because if the textbook method is literally setting people up to fail physically and mentally, the traditional approach would probably just say, well, try harder or go stretch for 6 months and come back.
Right, yeah.
But our sources propose a completely different paradigm, which is the adaptive takeoff. The text shifts the entire philosophy of what an instructor is supposed to do. So the goal of the first few lessons isn't immediate perfection. The goal is finding a successful movement.
And focusing on a successful movement changes the entire dynamic, because the goal becomes finding a way for the learner to actually stand up, feel the energy of the wave, and experience that glide. To facilitate this, the instructor's role evolves. They have to stop being a strict form enforcer standing there with a clipboard.
Right, checking boxes.
Yeah, checking boxes. They need to become a researcher. They are actively analyzing the student's unique height, weight distribution, and joint mobility to calculate their best physical path to getting on their feet.
I love how the infographic visually breaks down this research process. It proves that the basic pop-up is just one option on a menu of 5 distinct methods. Let me run through some of these because the physics behind them are so clever.
Please do.
First, you have the knee standing method. The text recommends this specifically for larger builds or folks with poor knee mobility. You paddle, drop to both knees first to anchor your center of gravity, raise your upper body, and then stand from that stable knee position. So it takes that explosive plyometric burpee and breaks it into manageable, low-impact steps.
By breaking it down, you are significantly reducing the required hip mobility and core explosion. You are using the knees as a temporary pivot point to manage the body's mass.
Then there is the rolling pop-up, which is recommended for small waves that lack speed. Because a slow wave isn't providing any forward momentum to help you up, you use a dynamic rolling upper body lift to quickly get your feet under you. It is a highly responsive movement. But my absolute favorite on this list is what they translate as the sweet or crouching method.
Ah, yes. The crouching method is fascinating because it tackles a completely different barrier, which is the psychological one.
Right. The infographic says this is for beginners who lack flexibility, but primarily for those dealing with fear. You push up into this really low crouch. You just hold it there. You maintain that low center of gravity to give yourself psychological stability before you fully stand up and ride. You are literally designing a physical technique to solve a mental block.
We can actually look at the neuroscience of why that works. When a beginner feels the unstable surface of the board accelerating down a wave, the brain's amygdala senses danger and triggers a panic response. And when you enter fight or flight mode, your muscles tense up, your breathing gets shallow, and your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for executing complex new tasks, essentially goes offline.
Wow, so the crouching method acts as a biological hack. By keeping your center of gravity incredibly low, you drastically reduce the physical wobble of the board.
Right.
And that newfound stability sends a signal up your nervous system, telling the amygdala, hey, we are safe, we are balanced.
Exactly.
It turns off the panic alarm so the prefrontal cortex can turn back on, allowing the surfer to actually focus on riding the wave.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, I hear the logic in that biological hack, but I'm looking at this crouching method, and I keep thinking, doesn't this just teach bad habits? Like if I spend my first 10 sessions learning to surf, hunched over or dropping to my knees every time, aren't I burning a sloppy motor pattern into my brain? Won't that ruin my form and hold me back when I want to surf bigger waves later on?
That concern is actually the most common criticism of adaptive learning across the board. It feels like you are lowering the standard and accepting mediocrity. But the educational text provides a very strong rebuttal to that fear. The authors argue that we are confusing the destination with the starting line. These adaptive methods are intended as a bridge, not a permanent destination.
A bridge to the textbook form.
Yes, exactly. The manifesto makes it explicitly clear that the textbook posture is still the ultimate goal. Achieving perfect foot placement and fluid motion is the ideal way to surf efficiently. However, the starting line does not have to be the same for everyone. By utilizing an adaptive takeoff, the student secures an early success experience. They feel the joy of the glide.
Yeah.
That early success builds the immense confidence and emotional momentum required to keep showing up. Once they have that baseline of balance and joy, then, and only then, can they begin the gradual process of refining their form toward the textbook ideal.
Because you can't refine a technique if the person has already quit out of frustration on day one.
Precisely. You are prioritizing the emotional and psychological momentum of the learner over rigid biomechanical compliance. Success breeds success.
And you can actually see what that bridge looks like in real time. There's a human element in our sources today that embodies everything we are talking about, and that's the YouTube journey of surfer Cass. So she is a 40-year-old plus-size beginner surfer based out of Santa Monica, California. But she is not just surfing her local break. Her channel documents her traveling all over the world. I mean, she is catching waves in Oahu, El Salvador, Ecuador. She is everywhere.
Yeah, her channel serves as a brilliant real-time case study of adaptive learning in action.
She has this whole series of YouTube shorts called Cass Wants to Rip. And her philosophy is incredibly refreshing. Her mantras are all about normalizing the not-so-perfect rides. She openly talks about how progress in surfing feels painstakingly slow, but she notes that the overarching goal isn't to have an epic, flawless session every time.
Right.
The goal is simply to keep showing up. She even has a specific video where she gives her 2 cents on the knee pop-up we were just dissecting, and she is fiercely defending her use of it as a valid tool for her body.
And Cass's journey connects beautifully to a very specific, advanced adaptive technique detailed in both our text and the infographic. It is called the sidestep method, or dynamic positioning.
Okay, the mechanics of the sidestep method sound complex on paper, but it solves a massive problem for non-textbook body types. So the standard rule in surfing physics is that when you pop up, your feet must land perfectly on the board's center line. That line running down the middle of the board is called the stringer.
Right, and the stringer acts as the fulcrum of a seesaw. If your weight is perfectly centered on that fulcrum, the board glides flat. But for a surfer like Cass, who is navigating the board with a wider physical footprint and a different center of gravity, hitting that narrow stringer perfectly in one explosive jump is incredibly difficult.
Because normally, if your front foot lands off center, you are immediately going into the drink. You've shifted all your mass to one side of the pivot point, the rail digs into the water, and the rotational force just flips the board.
Yeah, it's instant. So to prevent that flip, the text suggests this 5-step dynamic approach. Step 1, just stand up in whatever position works for your body to get vertical, even if that means your front foot lands way off center. Step 2 is the magic part, which is compensation. If your front foot lands too far to the left, you deliberately place your back foot off center to the right.
So you are balancing the seesaw on the fly.
Yes.
You are creating a new, temporary center of gravity that spans diagonally across the stringer, rather than forcing your body into a straight line it can't handle yet.
It is brilliant physics. So step 3 is simply securing that diagonal balance. Just take a breath. Step 4, you gradually shuffle and micro-adjust both the front and back feet inward toward that center line. And step 5, you finally lock in that stable textbook stance.
So instead of demanding a perfect landing in one explosive, terrifying second, you are breaking the landing into a 5-second dynamic negotiation with the board. It reminds me of the micro-adjustments you make when you accidentally step on a patch of ice. You don't freeze in a perfect posture. You widen your stance, you shift your weight, you negotiate with the slippery environment until you find stability.
Stand first, adjust second. It drastically increases the success rate for people who need a wider margin for error.
And you can see the joyous results of this philosophy all over Cass's channel. Like, she is not paralyzed by the need to have this perfect form. She is out there experiencing the pure thrill of the sport. She has clips from the Palm Springs Surf Club where she is almost getting barreled. Yeah, she is surfing twice a day in Ecuador. She is dealing with flat, June gloom waves in California, but still finding ways to have fun. Like, if she had an instructor who yelled at her for not doing the textbook pop-up on day 1, we wouldn't have episode 129 of Cass Wants to Rip. She might never have booked that trip to El Salvador.
It is a powerful testament to what happens when you remove arbitrary physical gatekeeping and allow people to learn at their own mechanical pace.
We've spent this whole time analyzing how the human body moves through space, how to trick the amygdala, and how to balance the seesaw. But there's a massive external variable sitting right underneath the surfer that we haven't touched on yet. What about the physical environment itself?
The equipment, yes. This is the unsung hero of the entire adaptive learning process. The educational text makes a very firm point here that fixing the body's posture and utilizing dynamic positioning is only half the battle. You have to match the physical environment to the learner. And in surfing, the environment largely comes down to the volume and buoyancy of the surfboard.
So the board's ability to displace water.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that if you force a beginner onto a board that is too small, too narrow, or simply lacks volume, it makes even the best adaptive takeoffs completely impossible. A small board doesn't displace enough water to support a heavy off-center landing. It reacts violently to the slightest shift in weight.
So if you are trying that 5-step sidestep method on a tiny board, the moment your front foot lands slightly off the stringer, the board simply sinks under the concentrated pressure and you crash. Like, you can't do a 5-second dynamic negotiation on a sinking platform.
No, you have zero margin for error. You cannot practice an adaptive shuffling takeoff if the board doesn't provide a stable, forgiving surface to support those micro adjustments.
And that connects right back to a great detail from Surfer Cass's channel. She has a video specifically discussing her equipment, and she mentions riding a board that might technically be considered too big or too high volume for her by standard advanced metrics. But she doesn't care. She loves it because, as she puts it, it floats like a dream.
That massive float, that wide surface area and extra foam, is what gives her the time and the physical grace to execute those adaptive movements. It provides the necessary buoyancy for her to learn, to make mistakes, and to adjust without immediately being punished by the ocean.
Think about how often we blame ourselves for failing at a task in our everyday lives. Maybe you are struggling to learn a complex new software system at work, or you are trying to pick up a second language, or you are attempting a new hobby and you just can't get it to click. We immediately internalize that failure. We say, I'm not smart enough, or I'm just not coordinated. But this deep dive into surfing mechanics asks us to consider a different angle, which is, what if you are just using the wrong size board?
Right.
What if the environment you are trying to learn in has zero margin for error? We need the right environment, the right buoyancy, whether that is a supportive manager, better onboarding tools, or just a longer timeline to safely practice, wobble, and adjust our skills.
We have to give ourselves the float to figure it out.
Exactly. Let's recap the journey we have been on today. We started by looking at the rigid, exclusionary nature of textbook learning, where the basic pop-up acts as a physical barrier for anyone whose body doesn't match a very specific blueprint. We unpacked the biomechanics of why that fails, and discovered the brilliance of the adaptive takeoff through our 5-method infographic, learning that knee standing or crouching isn't a failure. It is a biological hack and a bridge to success.
Yeah.
And we saw this philosophy lived out beautifully in the global wave-chasing adventures of Surfer Cass, who proves that showing up and negotiating with the board is how you actually progress. And finally, we learned the physics of buoyancy and why none of this works unless your environment gives you the margin for error to support your unique learning curve.
The sources essentially offer a masterclass in redefining the role of a teacher. True instruction isn't about standing over someone as a form enforcer. It is about acting as a researcher of human potential. If we want people to genuinely learn and retain complex skills, we have to allow them to be messy, to be slightly off-center, and to find a successful movement first. The textbook perfection can wait until the confidence is built.
It is about meeting the learner where their feet actually land, not where a manual says they should be.
And that leaves us with a final fascinating thread to pull on. If the textbook standard in something as fluid and natural as surfing was clearly designed around one specific, rigid body type, it really makes you wonder, what other best practices in our corporate workplaces, in our school systems, or in our daily routines are actually just invisible sets of rules designed for someone else's shape? And what would happen to our potential if we finally gave ourselves permission to step off the center line, negotiate with the environment, and find our own balance first?